very special word of welcome to everybody at our campuses. I'm so happy to be with you. Everybody in Kernersville, God bless you guys. Clemens, glad to be with you. And King, my brothers and sisters. And to everybody that's joining us online, welcome. Are you ready for some good news? There is a giant celebration going on right now in heaven. And you don't have to wait to be a part of that. You can cultivate a habit of celebration in which you are, in a real sense, participating with the glorious celebration that's already happening in heaven. We're talking about the classic spiritual disciplines, what I've called gateways of grace. And today, I want to talk to you about the practice of celebration. If you've been at Ronaldo for a while, you've probably heard me tell about the time when our son Bennett was little, a preschooler, and he was working with finger paints or crayons or something, and he realized he had made something look like a letter. He brought it over to my wife and said, "Why, you've made the letter C. I believe God's given you a good brain and you're going to be a good writer and a good reader. You're already starting doing your letters." And the preschooler Bennett started whirling around and jumping for joy. And Ann called me in, brought Abby in, and she said, "Bennett just made his first letter." And she put on some music, and we all just started dancing in a silly way around the living room. It's so embarrassing. And it began something that I'm embarrassed to talk about, but it's a real thing. And we call it family dance, family dance. And ever since that time, all throughout their growing up, if someone found something worthy of celebration, perhaps they discovered a blessing, or perhaps they had something good happen in their life for which you could give thanks to God and could celebrate, then they just immediately call for a family dance. And what that means is, the rule is you just stop what you're doing if you're at home and you go do the family dance. I mean, it's like, y'all, we're closing the curtains, we're cutting down the blinds because none of us can dance much. And you put on that crazy music and we're just all in there dancing around, and all throughout the time, family dance, family dance. And sometimes they'd be like, "I don't want to do a family dance." No, the rule is you do the family dance. And so even after they grew up and they were living in different places as adults, we keep up by text with each other pretty regularly all the time. And every now and then you'll see it, and one of the kids and my adult children send in a text, "Family dance." And it might say, "Got accepted to law school," or "Got a promotion," family dance. It's like, it is a picture of something that we all need in our life. And that is that there must be a safe place where you can, without fear of being rejected or having it downplayed, or someone saying you ought not be celebrating, that we have a place where we can celebrate the goodness of God to us, wherein our worth is validated and our future is filled with hope, and we are energized for the journey that we're on. It becomes to us a habit. And in our text today, I am taken by Jesus, who is preparing for the hardest day in human history for any human being. Good Friday, we call it. But it was the day of his false accusations and mock trial and humiliation at the hands of the authorities, in which he would be nailed to a Roman cross and slowly suffocate. A day in which he would bleed. But the hardest thing of all, it would be the day in which the Son of God, who was without sin, would take mystically into his being the sin of the world and the shame, and he would drink the cup of suffering and wrath to the dregs on our behalf. And it is so interesting that before that Good Friday, on the Thursday, Jesus has this to say: "Go into the city," Matthew 26:18, "to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house." So the disciples did. I like reading that from the New International Version because it uses this word celebrate. It is perhaps not technically the most accurate word because this word poieo in Greek, it really just means to do or to keep or to observe. But the word celebrate captures the essence of the whole nature of the life of Israel and what the feasts were all about, and what the picture, therefore, for us is that the Savior of the world, who in 3 days will have the most glorious victory imaginable, he will defeat death, emerge from the tomb, disciples will run for joy, angels will look on with awe, and all of the cosmos will be changed. But he doesn't wait and say, I'll just celebrate after the resurrection. But he says, let's celebrate the Passover. It is a picture of the heart of God and of a principle for us to celebrate even in the midst of the difficulties, and perhaps when we are in our difficulties, we need to celebrate all the more. So do you see this? Jesus celebrated not just in the aftermath of a big win, not just on a happy occasion, but he was demonstrating it something more like a discipline or like a rhythm of life. And that's what I want to talk to you about. And I think the best way to talk about the biblical notion of celebration from this text and others is to overturn some of the common misconceptions, things that we think that just aren't true when it comes to celebration, and we'll look at it from a biblical framework. And the first misconception of this is it's often thought that celebration is something that is meant to just be occasional, spontaneous, a reaction to something, and of course it can be. Family dance, it can be. But biblically, really, the notion of celebration is not something that is optional and occasional, but something that's mandated and ongoing. To understand what gets fulfilled in Jesus and what is available to us as Christian, I want you to look at this from the backdrop of the whole landscape of Israel's life. Because the life of Israel was, in many ways, always revolving around celebration. It was one of the ways you could define the uniqueness of Hebrew culture. Partly it started with God, the Creator, who in the beginning created and celebrated. Genesis 1:3, for example, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And what you see is that though God didn't complete all the creation in one day, He could have, but He didn't. He decided to create this way, and He said, "Let there be light." And there's the first day, and what you read at verse 4, and God saw that the light was good. So God created, and then He celebrated. He created on the next day, and He celebrated. And each day He said it was good. Until finally, at verse 31, God saw everything He'd made, and behold, it was very good. And there's evening and morning, the sixth day. So it was good, it was good, it was good. And after He completed His work, He said it was very good. And He celebrated all of that. And then He rested. And I know these things are mysterious to talk about God, who never loses His energy, but I think it is to say that in the nature of God, there was celebration every day of creation, and then on a Sabbath, He Himself celebrated and invited His people, as we looked at in one of the disciplines about Sabbath, invited people into a rhythm where you work each day, find something good in that day to celebrate. Work another day, find something good to celebrate in that day, every day. But then one day of the week, you just celebrate. You just celebrate. That's what Sabbath was. You only celebrate. And you have somewhere on that day a wonderful meal. Even if you're poor, you scrape some pennies together, you scrounge up some scrawny chicken, and you're going to have you some sort of feast on Sabbath day. Every week. So every day there's a little bit of celebration, then every week there's a whole day of celebration. But in the life of Israel, there were 7 feasts, 7 festivals, celebrations that took place throughout the year. 3 were clumped together in the spring, 1 in the summer, 3 in the fall. So in the spring there's Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where you'd have the original spring cleaning and clear out all leavened bread out of the house because it was a symbol of sin. And they would play little games with the kids, like they'd finally hide one last piece of leavened bread somewhere in the house and see which child could go find it. The kids are just loving this. And then they would have the Feast of First Fruits, where they bring the very early fruits of the harvest. This is in the springtime, so it's just begun on your earliest harvest, and you bring it before the Lord, and you say, thank you for this. It's not much yet, but it's proof that more is coming, and you celebrate that. And then in the summertime, 50 days after Passover, 7 weeks after, it was called the Feast of Weeks, therefore, it became known as Pentecost, which comes from the word 50, in which you would celebrate now the harvest that is coming in the summertime. And this becomes the precursor of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. That's Pentecost, the coming of the revelation of God. But anyway, then in the fall, they'd have three feasts, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Booths. And on the Feast of Trumpets, they would sound the shofar, and people could stop their harvesting, come in and have a celebration. In the middle of it, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, which you could think of as very sober because it's the day that the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies and offer a blood sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins of the people. But even that was a celebration because it was the day for the assurance that there was atonement for their sin. And then they would celebrate what's called the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles, where they would go and live in a leafy hut for 7 days, remembering how God took care of them in the wilderness when they didn't have houses to live in. And the kids love it. It's like going camping. I'm just saying that if you lived in ancient Israel, you either were getting ready for a big celebration, or you were in the middle of a big celebration, or you were cleaning up from a big celebration, telling the stories about how great it was. Every day a little bit of celebration, every week a whole day of celebration, and 7 feasts during 3 different seasons of the year. The principle becomes clear, doesn't it? The way God sees it, celebration is not optional and just simply occasional. It is mandated, it is regular. In other words, God thinks this is really, really, really important. It's a spiritual discipline. We need to basically either be getting ready to celebrate or celebrating or cleaning up from one. That's the way God wants us to live. Here's the second misconception. This notion that God really has mandated, it goes far to overturn a second misconception, and that is that some people think that there are those kind of people that have a life that's really easy and really happy, and that they always have all these wonderful things that happen to them, and that's why they celebrate. But that there are other people whose life are just hard and rotten, and there's nothing really to celebrate. Now, it's not to say that some people don't have easier life than others. Certainly they do. But biblically, what you see is that the mandate to celebrate doesn't relate so much to whether your life happens to be going well. There's something more transcendent than that. Some time ago, I was stuck in a crowded airport on a busy travel day, and lots of planes being rerouted, canceled, and delayed. Just sitting in the airport, hoping for my flight to come up, and looking at the face of other people, bored out of their minds, frustrated, tired, just would be somewhere other than sitting in that airport. And there's everybody in there's miserable, except one traveler. There was one traveler who seemed plumb happy and giddy almost. This traveler would go over and he would look out the window and watch planes take off. And when they take off, he would just spin around. And sometimes a plane would come and land and he'd throw his head back and just laugh and giggle. And one time, a big plane took off real fast and he went down on that well-trodden airport floor and just did a somersault. I guess by now you've figured out that this traveler was a toddler. And he just kept looking out the window and he was having the time of his life. Was his circumstance any different than ours? No, we're all travelers. We're all stuck in the same airport. But the adults had lost their capacity to be awestruck at the fact that a huge machine could thrust itself into the air or could be traveling 400 or 500 miles per hour and then somehow come down and land safely. Adults were just bored with it all. But Jesus said in Matthew 18, if you want more of the kingdom of heaven, if you want to be in it, if you want the kingdom life, then become like a little child. Maybe it's because Jesus just loved this. Someone has estimated that a 4-year-old laughs 300 times a day and a 40-year-old laughs about 3 or 4 times a day. And sometimes we go days we don't laugh at all. And children just laugh all the time. And I think Jesus just liked it. It's interesting, Jesus just says at one point, he said, I've really been looking forward to celebrating this feast with you. He was just looking forward to it. The nature of Jesus is that he is eager for the celebration, almost like a little child, and he invites us into it. There's this interesting story he tells that we're told in Luke about Jesus inviting a tax collector to follow him. His name's Levi, or he's called Matthew. And tax collectors were just despised because they were Jewish men that worked for the Roman government to collect the fees, and they were allowed to pilfer off the top. They were getting rich and taking advantage of their Jewish brothers and sisters, and so they were hated by the Jews, and they were ostracized. And we come to Luke chapter 5 and verse 27. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at a tax booth, and he said, follow me. And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house, and there was a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with him. The Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with the tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I'm not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You see what he's modeling here? Nothing's happened yet. Levi, Matthew, has been given this incredible privilege of following the greatest rabbi ever. And so Jesus is welcoming him into the inner circle, this man who's normally ostracized. And so it is that Levi's excited and gives this big feast. And Jesus doesn't say, hold on, let's don't celebrate right now. You hadn't even repented yet. You hadn't grown spiritually. Let's get some people converted before we do this. But instead, Jesus just gets caught at this big party where they invite all these other tax collectors and come in. In Luke 14, Jesus tells a story about a wealthy man who gave a great banquet and invited all these noble people to come, but they all had different excuses. They were too busy. The celebration was beneath them, and they didn't come. So the wealthy man sent out his servant and said, go to the highways and the byways and just invite anybody. Just compel them to come in. He's saying the kingdom of God's like this. It's not that some people have easy, carefree lives and therefore they can celebrate, while others have difficult lives and troubles, and so they can't celebrate. It's not like that. It is that some people are more like that toddler who just find a way to celebrate in the midst of it. In other words, celebration is, in the first place, not optional, it's mandated. And in the secondly, it's not a privilege reserved for the fortunate few people who have an easy life. It's available to all. It's something you choose. Here's a third misconception. A lot of people think that celebration is just the fruit of a victory. But biblically, it actually is the fuel for victory. I was at a basketball game last year down at the Dean Dome in Chapel Hill. And they, like all these schools, they have this big hype video that comes up right before the game starts, and they're showing on the big screens, and it's showing some of the greatest Carolina basketball players ever, some huge dunks, and Tyler Hansbrough out there with a bloody nose fighting through to get the ball, and Michael Jordan shooting the game-winning championship shot in 1982, and all this stuff, and they're playing all that, and there's all this great music, and it's loud and everything, and everybody's just cheering. Nothing's happened yet. The game hadn't even started, and people are celebrating like crazy. And then they do the starting lineups, and they'll start with the other team, and from the other team here, so-and-so guard, so-and-so, and everybody just kind of either boos or doesn't say anything. And it says, and now you're starting Tar Heels at guard. The All-ACC Consensus All-American Jerry West winner, senior from White Plains, New York. It's R.J. Ray Davis! And the place starts going crazy. And they do this with every one of the starting places until you know it's just in a frenzy. And nobody's actually scored a basket yet. And I was sitting there during this game and I was like, could you imagine that if you were sitting next to somebody who was a fan, but they're just not cheering? RJ goes out and makes a three-pointer and everybody's like, yeah, and his fan's just sitting there. And then somebody gets a dunk and everybody's, and fans just sitting there. And like, imagine like if you turned to him and said, I know you're a Carolina fan, you got Carolina blue on, you're looking here, but you're not cheering, what's going on? Imagine the fan going, I do not celebrate anything until the end of the game when we determine whether we have won. What would you say to that person? You'd say, dude, the point is this. Our celebration before we have won is going to help us win. We're bringing joy and encouragement and faith and enthusiasm and momentum in this place. You don't wait until the victory is over. You celebrate along the way. Charlie Shedd was a Presbyterian pastor, and he wrote these beautiful little books, Letters to Karen, Letters to Philip, full of pithy wisdom to people that are newlywed. But at one time he said that this couple came to him and their marriage was on the brink of falling apart. And very practical pastor, and he gave him something practical to do. He invited him to go home and write a list of 10 things that they really did love and appreciate about one another. So they went down, they wrote down on a piece of paper 10 things, even though they had a lot of problems and a lot of things they didn't like about each other. But they wrote it down. The husband took his and he just taped it on the wall right next to the bed. Wife put hers over here on her dresser. And every morning when they get up, the first thing to do is they just read those things out loud. And they were supposed to just read them out loud and just come back a couple weeks later and just, talk to the pastor. And so they did. And their marriage began to get restored. And a couple of years later, the man came in and talked to Pastor Shedd. And he said, thank you for that exercise. He said, you know what happened? He said, not only did I memorize all 10 of those things about my wife, but I added to it over the years. And he said, sometimes I'm at work and I hear other men talking about their wives in negative ways, and then I'll think about my list. And something inside me goes, wow, that's pretty special. I got a special wife, and I really love her. And I'm replaying this list in my mind. I think the biblical principle that Jesus is after here, he says, I'm eager to celebrate the Passover with you, even though tomorrow will be the hardest day in human history. The Son of God will be crucified. Because the celebration is not something that you do just because you've got a victory, but it's something you do help to move you towards the victory. The Passover feast itself had in God's mind for the people a huge purpose. The celebration has a huge purpose. Let's look back at Exodus 13, where God is telling them about the purpose of the Passover. Exodus 13:8, you shall tell your son on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand, a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time. So they had a Passover feast because it was by this blood of the Lamb that they painted over their doors that God said the destroyer would not enter in and you would be saved. As the destroyer pass over, though destroying the firstborn of all of Egypt. And they were delivered from their slavery. And so they're given instructions. You're going to take a lamb and you're going to roast it. And you're also going to have bitter herbs because you'll remember the bitterness of slavery. And every time you do this, you celebrate what God's done for you. And you remember it because what it's doing inside of you is fueling something inside of you. There's so much to worry about in life. But a memorial celebration, something like the Passover feast that is evoking the imagery of the power of God to save, it is not only recreating the kind of experience of God's saving mercies, but it's real fuel because you're remembering if we were helpless slaves and He liberated us, how much more for what we're going to face tomorrow can we count on Him to be faithful? So the celebration is power for living. All right, here's a fourth misconception, and it's important because I think there's a lot of this that people assume that those folks that celebrate childlike celebration and so forth, they're just superficial. They don't know about the real problems of life. They're just not sophisticated enough to know that we don't really do that. It makes you think of the story of David when he finally is going to be put on the throne in Jerusalem, and he's bringing the Ark of the Covenant, which is a symbol of the presence of God, and bringing it into Jerusalem, and he just has this incredible celebration. 2 Samuel 6, verse 12, David brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And look, he organized this whole celebration. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And then David danced before the Lord with all his might. He's just whirling about like a child. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel, all of them, he just joined in this celebration. They brought the ark of the Lord up with shouting and with the sound of the horn. But his wife, the daughter of Saul, verse 16, as the ark of the Lord came in the city, Michal, the daughter of Saul, she looked out the window and she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Beware, there are people that despise the celebration. Perhaps they haven't known how to enter into it, or they're more committed to a sense of being a sophisticated adult, and think that those that are celebrating are just too childlike and too naive, and they're just in denial. There's this fascinating movie. It's a 1998 film called Life is Beautiful. Won some awards at Cannes Film Festival. An odd film, incorporated some playful comedic themes into this really heavy and intense backdrop of the Holocaust. And it tells about an Italian Jewish man named Guido, who himself is winsome and comical and sharp, and he gets married and has a son. And then in 1944, this whole movie shifts in the horrors of what's going on in Nazi Germany, and Guido and his son and Guido's uncle are all seized, put on a train for a concentration camp. And at the concentration camp, the horrors are there. And in fact, Guido's uncle suffers the fate of the gas chambers through those phony showers that are so horrific. And here's Guido, and he's got his little boy. And he decides he's going to tell the boy it's a game. He says it's a game. And he says, you get points for everything you do right. And whoever gets the most points at the end of the game, you get a tank. And so the little boy starts celebrating anytime he's given some points. And for example, his dad says, if you cry and make a lot of noise while the guards come around, then you lose points. But if you can learn how to be quiet and hide from the guards, then you get points. It was stuff like that. And so all throughout, he plays the game up until the very end, where in this kind of concluding scene, Guido himself does not survive but gets shot by the guards, but he has taken his little boy and put him into a box where he's hiding. And it's the day that Allied forces are coming, and then suddenly U.S. soldiers come in and a huge Sherman tank coming down, and the little boy comes out of the box and he sees the tank and he thinks he's won. And he goes over and talks to these Americans, and next thing you know, they've got him up riding on the tank, and not long later, he's reunited with his mother. I remember when Ann and I first saw that, and we were so stirred by this strange, delightful, award-winning Italian film. And I said, was it good what the father did? Or was he kind of lying to his child where there's just denial? And she said unequivocally, no. She says, the greatest parent ever. He fostered a plan for celebration in the midst of the hardest thing imaginable. And that's not really denial, it is finding a way in the midst of it. People that really learn to celebrate, they're not in denial of the hardships of life, but they're finding an answer of God's grace in the middle of it. A really hard week. We face hard weeks, but it's been a really hard one. One of our precious young people died suddenly and tragically this week. Marky Battle has been married for a year and a half, and Marky was our daughter Abby's very best childhood friends. They have been just best of friends, and she's like a daughter to me. And so we're praying for Linda, we're praying for that family, that mother, for Marky's sister, and we've been doing a lot of crying. But even after the day after her death, and I'm over with Linda and Lindley, and we are there, and my daughter's there, and we cry a lot, but then we catch our breath, and at some point we tell some stories about how when Abby and Marky were little, and they went for their first dance lessons, and Abby's a rule follower, and if they said to hold your hand like this, she did. But Marky was a free spirit, and she would just do whatever she wanted to do. And we were telling the stories, and we laughed some. Is that a miracle? Yeah. In the midst of the worst agony of a parent's life, that she could also laugh with a seed of celebration, of remembering the goodness of God. This is what I'm saying about celebration. It's powerful spiritual warfare. It's not naivete. It's not unsophisticated and empty denial of the hardships of life. This is what Jesus did. He is going to be crucified and said, I want to keep this celebration with you. Go prepare the Passover. He said, I've really been looking forward to this. It's really, really powerful. It's not denial. And here's a final misconception. It revolves around this question that people would say, isn't it sort of arrogant to celebrate? You know, I don't want to be that football player in the end zone doing his little dance, you know. Some of that stuff kind of gets on my nerves after a while. And the question, if we celebrate our kids, you know, won't it go to their heads? Won't it just feed into the narcissism of this new generation and all that? In other words, does too much celebration make us more self-absorbed? And the answer is only if we do it in the wrong way. In the Silicon Valley, there's this new movement of wealthy people having these ridiculous birthday parties for their kids that sometimes cost six figures. It doesn't help when you're at Glamour magazines showing photos of Kardashian kids that are having stuff like this, like real carousel brought over for their birthday party, or having a birthday party where you have life-size T-Rexes because it's a dinosaur theme. Or if your birthday cake looks like this. This was a Kardashian birthday cake. Yeah, some of this, like, wait, there's something really wrong about that. Yeah, there is in this sense. It's great to celebrate our kids. And here's why. If a kid brings home straight A's and nobody celebrates, then the kid goes, what do you got to do to get celebrated around here? And the kid will either go, well, I might as well not try. There's no celebration anyway. Or the kid might say, I'm going to try and try and try until it becomes anxious and performance-based. We need to celebrate because it establishes worth. It plants hope and it brings joy. But if we celebrate in a way that we say, you are better than other people, if we celebrate in a way that we say the world revolves around you, if we celebrate like that, then social scientists have discovered it can lead to narcissistic thinking. So we celebrate not with a mentality that says, hey, you're so much better than the kid down the street, we're really celebrating you. But instead you celebrate with the framework of the goodness of God. This is something really important to God, is that when you have the accomplishment, when something good comes in your life, your heart turns to Him. This is what He said in Deuteronomy 8:10 about when the time would come that they'd be in the promised land prosperous. And the Lord said, you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land He's given you. But take care lest the Lord your God but take care lest you forget the Lord your God, when you've eaten and are full and have built good houses, and when your herds and flocks multiply and silver and gold is multiplied. Beware, verse 17, lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So even if you're celebrating just a birthday, what you're really saying is, we're so glad God made you. You are a treasure from the Lord, you see? Even if something great happens and you just won the scholarship, isn't God good to show you favor or to give you such a good brain, and you celebrate like that? That's the kind of celebration that builds up instead of being destructive and narcissistic. All right, let's make this plain. What we're saying is that every day, find a way to incorporate some celebration, even on your hardest days. Maybe you do like our family. My mom taught us, we're going to celebrate 2 blessings, talk about them, and give gratitude. Every week, a day of celebration, a feast of some sort. Even if you got to just scrape together a few pennies and get you a little chicken, get you some kind of nice meal, family meal, whatever it be. Laugh, tell stories. Plan traditions and celebrations throughout the year, spring, summer, and fall. And of course, we got Christmas, so we can always be celebrating. Don't wait till you have the final product before you celebrate, but celebrate the process. Don't just celebrate the big things, celebrate the small things. Celebrate others' worth, but don't do so by comparing them to others or by putting down others. And root all celebration in God's loving and redemptive work and character. Because in the end, we, as people of God in Christ Jesus, are made for this and have been given the ultimate and eternal cause for celebration. So the Passover that Jesus was going to celebrate with his disciples the day before his crucifixion, he celebrated it in part to clarify that very night, here's what this really means. He said, really, this is about my body. He took the bread and he said, this is like my body. It's given for you. And the blood that he would shed, he said, really, it's my blood that's poured out for you. Think of that as they were going through the different cups of wine that they would drink. As you're remembering the Passover lamb, he's saying, I am the Passover lamb. Paul said it plainly in 1 Corinthians 5:7, for Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. He is our Passover. He is our feast of unleavened bread, sinlessness. He is our Pentecost. He is our Yom Kippur. He is our Feast of Tabernacles, the one who gave up heavenly raiment and tabernacled in our midst, so that we, no matter what we're in or where we are, we not only have a rhythm of life, we have Christ. Anyone in Christ has this ultimate eternal cause for celebration. Family dance, family dance. If in our family it gets called upon, it's a rule, you got to jump up. I'll close the curtains, I'll dance around a little bit. You got to find your own rhythm because, beloved, if Jesus wanted to celebrate even before the day of his crucifixion and he didn't wait until the resurrection, how much more should we celebrate? When you celebrate, you invite the very celebration of heaven into your life. And that's the gospel.